The Bloodline story is touching on 4 years now. It's almost an unprecedented storyline to play out this long in WWE. The Mega Powers back in the 1980s, between Macho Man and Hulk Hogan going from one WrestleMania to another, that story lasted about a year. If you count WCW, the NWO, if it's one cohesive storyline, it ran from 1996 to about 2000 and abruptly ended. The Bloodline is going to surpass that very soon. Heck, technically, and we're getting technical here, you could say that the Bloodline has lasted longer than the entire Attitude Era. Many of the greatest stories that played out over multiple years didn't have a constant flow that some feel this modern day all-encompassing storyline that the Bloodline is. It has a flow to it. Our point is that we don't even know which innings we're in. Remember Paul Heyman talking about how we were in the third inning of the Bloodline story? This kind of long-term storytelling is exactly what Triple H and his creative team likes doing. You best believe his team is going to play this out the way where it gets to the most satisfying conclusion possible. Remember WrestleMania 40? That was pretty satisfying. Considering that half of the Bloodline story has happened under this level of Triple H's creative control, it's likely going to be one of the defining arcs of his time at the creative mantle. So much of WWE's current golden age, some are calling it, can be attributed to this one story. What could Triple H's master plan for Roman Reigns and the Bloodline be? This is Sportskeeda Wrestling. I'm Kevin. Let us know what you think is going to happen with Roman Reigns and the Bloodline in the comments below. Join us as we look at what could be the plotting of months ahead and maybe even years ahead. Could it go that far?
Stand back. There's a new wrestling quiz coming through. Check out BrainBuster, the daily quiz that tests your WWE knowledge with winning streaks, stats, and more. It's time to see if you're up for the challenge.
So far, the new phase of the Bloodline began post-WrestleMania 40, with the fall of Roman Reigns being humbled at the hands of Cody Rhodes and losing his record-breaking or record-mounting title reign at the time. Solo Sikoa taking on complete control of the group in Roman Reigns' absence would follow. Solo would bring in Tama Tonga Loa, and what many consider the next big star in WWE, the Samoan werewolf Jacob Fatu. Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa have been decent, but it's quite clear that Solo and Jacob seem to be the front runners of this new group right now. Roman Reigns' return and attack on Solo at SummerSlam was a pivotal moment in him entering the next stage of his character. He's going to be the biggest good guy right now in WWE, regardless of how he's presented. It's just perception. He hasn't been around. Fans are excited to see him come back, but more of an anti-hero character is going to suit him way more than the traditional good guy role that we see Cody Rhodes playing. What the challenge is going to be is figuring out how to place this storyline over the next few months, how to keep him interesting when he's not there all the time too. Another challenge is going to be figuring out how to place the storyline within the next few months of WWE. With a lot going on, SmackDown moving back to the USA Network in the United States, and Raw making the big leap internationally to Netflix. When another Anoa'i family member, Manu, spoke to Sportskeeda Wrestling ahead of SummerSlam, he said that he thinks WWE is going to hold off on the entire Civil War match that a lot of people feel this is going to build to, with Roman leading one side against another side that Solo would general. And that's because he feels it's so highly anticipated that WWE really needs to, squeeze the juice out of this berry. Thankfully, there's time to build to all of that. Solo Sikoa hasn't been bad in his role, but considering his overall level of experience, it's a bit hard to buy the idea of him being the Bloodline's true leader, but that's kind of the idea. He is the false king, kind of usurping the throne. There could also be those reports that came out about Jacob Fatu and when he debuted. In case you missed them, the reports were basically that WWE, people within WWE, were concerned that Jacob was going to overshadow Solo Sikoa. In a way, it's kind of happening, and we doubt it's going to go unnoticed. Unlike the previous regime of creative in WWE, Triple H and his team are likely going to hone in on these reactions if they organically get bigger and change things while keeping them similar to the end goal. They did a lot of this in the ramp up to WrestleMania 40. They pivoted and it worked. According to Wrestling Observer Radio, the possible direction for WrestleMania 41 is going to see two key matches, The Rock versus Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns versus Solo Sikoa. If you kind of look at Raw and SmackDown after WrestleMania 40, it's easy to see how that could be the direction WWE is going in. But what if something changes and they have to pivot between then and now? We have to keep in mind that Roman Reigns isn't going to be appearing every week and wrestling on every premium live event. How do you keep him fresh? What if some things pivot and you have to change with that? So the idea is to make it count when he's around and really make the home runs with Roman really get cracked out of the park. As much as we'd like to see The Rock return in time for Survivor Series, for that War Games Bloodline Civil War match that everyone thinks is going to happen in Vancouver, it's difficult to logically fit him in. This isn't even accounting for the fact that he's one of the busiest men on earth and one of the biggest names in all of entertainment, not just WWE. He's unlikely to find the time between that and, maybe not appearing during WrestleMania season, though we think we could see him by then. So if we're going into War Games in Vancouver in a 4-on-4 type of situation, the fourth member of Roman's team, apart from Jimmy and Jey Uso, will likely have to be someone from his past, someone he is not reconciled with, a former member of the Bloodline, someone who may not be, directly in the family, but was an honorary Uso, Sami Zayn. It sounds predictable, and we'll admit it, it's not as exciting as The Rock returning, but it will get an emotional reaction. And if you can't get that with The Rock, who else can you do it with? Sami Zayn knows how to play on those emotions, and his relationship with Roman Reigns when he was in the Bloodline is something you can reconcile and work in a kind of a reverse engineering way. WWE cannot bring in another big Samoan wrestler for the sake of one match, right? They're going to have to consider what they offer beyond the Bloodline story itself. We've seen a bit of a tease of Sami Zayn and Jey Uso going after the World Tag Team Championships. So if they're together, he's going to fit into that group well, considering the history they have. It's also a good opportunity to have Sami Zayn and Roman Reigns reconcile, basically, reconfigure their relationship. We love that character development and the payoff of the history. But here's the thing, what if Solo Sikoa isn't the end goal for Roman Reigns here? We've mentioned in our earlier videos how Triple H has a much safer, more predictable, and build to a payoff type of storytelling that maybe Vince McMahon didn't have in his later years. Vince was a little bit more erratic with these shocks and surprises, especially in the last few years of him at the creative helm. But there could be one big twist waiting to happen, and it's all going to happen based on what happens at Survivor Series in Vancouver. We predict the outcome of that possible War Games match is going to determine the next few months leading up to WrestleMania. Yes, WrestleMania season starts in November now. You could also have Solo Sikoa's Bloodline win with Jacob Fatu being the star of the show, or you could have them lose to create a bit of dissension within Solo's Bloodline. But let's assume Team Solo, his Bloodline, wins, and it's Jacob Fatu who gets the decisive pinfall and has a dominant showing. Like so dominant that he even makes Roman Reigns look like an inexperienced rookie. WWE and Triple H already started putting in subtle hints that Jacob will be the star of the show. One example is those backstage segments where the new Bloodline are in a dark room in black suits with Solo Sikoa portraying a mafia boss aesthetic. And if you notice the light peeping in, it's focused on Jacob Fatu, not Solo. I know, yeah, so while the logical direction of the story would be Roman versus Solo at WrestleMania, there might be some understanding backstage that it's not necessarily a complete lock, if that is indeed the direction. So if Solo doesn't face Roman at WrestleMania, when do they face off? The answer is simple: the Royal Rumble. You could on one hand have Roman Reigns compete in the Rumble match itself for the winner that gets to stamp their way into a world title main event at WrestleMania. Yeah, and this would be the first time in 5 years before Solo costs him his Rumble, or you could have a straightforward match that headlines the show. No titles will be needed because it's a story story big enough to justify the spot. That's right, something with Roman that doesn't need a championship. Maybe let's get him away from that scene in general just for a little bit, especially on a personal issue like this. When a match like that headlines the Rumble, you know something is cooking, and we ain't talking about The Rock, though his spice is going to be all over this thing. Roman Reigns needs to win that match, with Solo getting a good showing and just falling short. As Roman celebrates and leaves with Jimmy and Jey Uso, Solo is once again left in the ring, frustrated in his defeat in a big-time match. By this point, WWE will have hopefully planted the seeds to imply that the new Bloodline isn't in the best place. There appears to be growing support for Jacob Fatu, with Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa more inclined to listen to him rather than Solo. And right after the main event of this Royal Rumble that we're hypothetically laying out, we could see Jacob Fatu destroying Solo in a way that's never been done before. It's hard to imagine WWE thinking of a new way to have a beatdown, but it needs to be so bad it makes Jacob Fatu look like the scariest man ever in WWE in years. We've seen his dominance, but this would be the werewolf unleashed. And if you want to add to the story further, have Roman Reigns, Jimmy, Jey, and Sami stand at the ramp watching everything unfold, shocked to see this ruthlessness that Solo is facing, maybe a ruthlessness he brought upon himself. Given that it'll all be good guys at this point, you can even have them walk back to save a vulnerable Solo Sikoa. This would be a bit counterintuitive considering how Solo has talked about Roman and said that he's not the tribal chief and blah blah blah, but that's how bad this beating has to be. But when they tried to come in, Jacob wrecks all four men to announce his arrival in an even bigger way. This would lead that many might consider the real money match of Jacob Fatu versus Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 41. Yes, the monster that Solo created versus the one true tribal chief. It's a little bit harder to imagine what WWE could do with Solo after this, but it could be presented as a beatdown so bad that he doesn't return for months. At this point, Tama Tonga, Tonga Loa would really only be there to serve Jacob Fatu, but they would be the ones that the Usos clash with in the final leg of the story. Perhaps WrestleMania 41 could be where it ends, with Jacob Fatu defeating Roman Reigns to become WWE's next true top name star. After that, it would make sense for WWE to finally make everybody go their separate ways and conclude the entire Bloodline thing. Unless they want to get The Rock involved, right? Yeah, I know, we haven't laid out any of that yet. It would also be the point where WWE fully pivots Jacob Fatu into a main event status, hopefully making him the one to end Cody Rhodes' reign as undisputed WWE champion, assuming he's still WWE champion. But the Bloodline story as we know it now will have to end at some point, but it's going to be looked back on as so significant that it's never going to fully die. It's always going to be there, floating, ever to be tapped into as a magical element to be added to a match with someone that's a part of this very special wrestling family. Every time a Samoan wrestler makes a big splash in WWE, there will always be remnants of the stardust of the Bloodline. Making Jacob Fatu the ultimate beneficiary is the way to go, at least in the eyes of some here at Sportskeeda Wrestling, because he's one of the best to ever come out of that incredible family. The family that has produced legends like Yokozuna, previously mentioned The Rock, Rikishi, Roman Reigns, the Usos, so many more. Considering that Roman Reigns is far closer to maybe the twilight, the final stage of his wrestling career, and the Bloodline could maybe end with him, it only makes sense that it all ends with the creation of the next generation. The next generation is going to continue to cement the Anoa'i dynasty as maybe one of the greatest wrestling families of all time, if not the greatest wrestling family of all time. Thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments below what you think.